Okay, I'm ready. Okay, welcome everyone to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority regular meeting for March 9th, 2018. If Mayor Camp would lead us in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Hulmart.
Yes, I have two items, Chair. The first one was the when the FORA board voted on the election of executive committee members, there was a suggestion that there be a discussion brought back to the board to discuss the selection policy and how to proceed with that. And at the direction of the executive committee, we are going to bring that back for the board to review at the April meeting. Wanted folks to be aware of that. Second item is a couple of minor mistakes that were in the board packets were sent out on Monday. One related to item 8C, which had to do with expenditures, and item 8C had a list that talked about the net increase of expenditures was $6,286,160. We altered that to correct it because this is not an increase of the unfunded actuarial liability expense of $586,160 is accurate. The trust expenditure amount of 5.7 is not an expenditure. It continues to be a set aside as the board approved, but this would be a different way of setting the funds aside. So those two corrections, Chair, I just want to mention. That's all I have under announcements.
Okay, and these others that are listed here are for if there's any questions on any of those.
Just double check here. Yeah, we did want to mention a couple things. I think several members here are participating in the CalEd, the California Association for Local Economic Development Conference that's going to be here in Monterey at the new conference center. Is that right, Council Chair, Board Member Hoffman? That's going to be March 14th through 16th. And we also want everyone to be aware of the Veterans Town Hall that's going to be March 21st at 5 p.m. It's going to be at the VA DOD Outpatient Clinic. There will be quite a few questions about outpatient care. I think there might be one or two questions about the pharmacy and opening the pharmacy that'll be occurring at that town hall. That's going to be on March 21st at 5 p.m.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the closed session. If legal counsel will read us into closed session.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 4A, closed session item, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9D2, one matter of significant exposure to litigation. The claimant is Marina Community Partners. And 4B, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court, case number 17CV004540. And we can adjourn to closed session.
Very good. Let's go. From closed session, if authority counsel will read us out.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Board met in closed session on items 4A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9D2, one matter of significant exposure to litigation, claimant Marina Community Partners. There is a lawsuit now filed in that case. There's nothing other to report out on that matter. And 4B, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A, keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. Nothing to report after the board members were briefed on the matter. Nothing to report out. Thanks.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Parker. Here. Supervisor Phillips. Here. Supervisor Adams. Mayor Edelin. Councilmember O'Connell. Here. Councilmember Morton. Here. Councilmember Hoffa. Here. Mayor Rubio.
Here.
Councilmember Alexander. Mayor Carbone. Here. Mayor Gunter.
Here.
Mayor Camp.
Here.
Councilmember Reimers.
Here.
Kathleen Lee. Nicole Hollingsworth. Erica Parker. Here. Debbie Hale. Dr. Diffenbach.
Here.
Steve Matarazzo.
Here.
Dr. Ochoa. Colonel Brown.
Here.
Bill Collins.
Here.
Dr. Tribley.
Here.
Lisa Reinheimer.
Here.
And Dr. Moore.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which consists of approve the February 9, 2018 meeting minutes, the Administrative Committee, Veterans Issues Advisory Committee, the Water Wastewater Oversight Committee, Base Reuse Plan Post Reassessment Category 1 Report, Prevailing Wage Status Report, the 2018 Anticipated FORA Board Work Program, 2018 Chair Committee Appointments, and public correspondence to the board. Is there anything that any board member would like to pull for further consideration?
I'd like to pull E, the base reuse plan post reassessment, for a question and a comment.
And so, yes, I would just like to give a comment on the prevailing wage F, 7F, and then I would like to pull 7G.
Okay. Let's hear your comment on F.
On 7F, I just wanted to take the opportunity that in the past we've always had a prevailing wage report provided by Sherry Damon. And one of the key questions has been, how will FORA go forward in the enforcement of prevailing wage, which we've imposed by a contractual relationship. And I wanted to thank Senator Monning for getting a letter from the Department of Industrial Relations that makes it very, very clear that the Department of Industrial Relations, the state of California, will enforce prevailing wage for any contracts that are entered into that are required under the base reuse plan to pay prevailing wage. So not only will they enforce the public contracts, but they will also enforce our contracts. So if someone does violate prevailing wage that's required under first generation projects, the plaintiffs have a venue and their rights will be protected. So FORA has gotten that clarification. Thank you to Senator Monning.
Okay. All right. Now you had a question and a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just wanted, this is an item that our planner, Mary Israel, has been working on with great diligence, and I wanted to just give her sort of a high five. She's been pouring through document after document after document to make sure that the Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee recommendations were consistent throughout all of FORA's documents, and in the process she found more corrections and consistencies that needed to be dealt with, and I know from the work that we did on the PRAC that it's complicated, it's tedious, and she really stuck with it and did I think did a great job. So I just want to thought it was worth that, giving her a little recognition by this board, because it's a lot of work. And so then my question is, I just want to make sure I'm understanding that this item is essentially receiving a report on staff's activities as opposed to approving a document. So we're just receiving the staff's kind of update on what they've been doing, correct?
Yes, so this is an item at the last motion about a year ago, the board approved or received the determination opinion report from MBI, Michael Baker International. And part of that motion was FORA staff would come back with Category 1 corrections. And this is that report back. It's an information item for the board.
Thank you. Now on item G, that's going to be, want to open that completely?
Yes. Is
As
that
a,
okay?
okay, yeah,
Just-
that
I
is.
think-
Well, let's take care of the rest of the consent agenda first. Was there anybody in the public that wanted to pull anything for further consideration? Any public comment on the consent agenda? Okay, I'll entertain a motion for the rest of the consent agenda minus G.
Move approval.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, the motion carries unanimously, and we will trail item G to the business items after item E, so it'll be 8F. Okay, thank you. The next item is a business item, the Eastside Parkway goals and objectives. There's not much to add here. This thing was fully vetted in several meetings, and I will be allowing public comment on this item. If you haven't already spoken, which all the comments are on the record, all the emails are on the record. If you have something new for public comment on this item, I will allow that, because this is a really important item for the public. So let's, Mr. Brinkman.
Okay. Chair Rubio, members of the board, just a brief presentation here today to get us up to speed on the Eastside Parkway goals and objectives second vote. So this presentation, I'll just have here some background and process about where we are in the process. Talk about the goals and objectives and those amendments made on the motion at the last meeting, and then get to the board's recommendation. So the process overview, we've seen this slide before. This is just to describe where we are. We're in the pre-CEQA phase of bringing this ahead. So that means we're working on the goals and objectives. And a goal is an underlying purpose, and an objective describes the way to achieve the goal. This is a project level EIR we're working on. A program level EIR example is the general plan, or the base reuse plan was at the program level. So when you get to a project level, you're implementing sometimes something within the larger program level. So here's a roadway within the program level transportation network. FORA has done this before in the CEQA process with 2nd Avenue, General Jim Moore Boulevard, and other roadways in the CIP that have been completed. So just to recap a little bit from our February meeting, we had a FORA staff presentation in February. We also, by request, had a TAMC staff presentation. The board took public comment. Staff and consultants addressed FORA board members' questions. And there was a motion to approve the Eastside Parkway goals and objectives, which also incorporated several amendments. It was a friendly amendment to the motion. Just to note that several public and board members have suggested changing the Eastside Parkway title. So that is something we'll be considering as we move ahead here. So just to describe the motion, so this motion from last month includes changes offered by board member Garfield, and the motion reflects the action taken at the February meeting. I'll get into some details of what those amendments were. So this just shows track changes and added phrases, and the deleted phrases are in cross-out and strike-out, and the added words are in red on this slide. So these are changes to the objectives made by the friendly amendment to the motion. And regional was added to the first objective here. And then in the second instance here, the complete wording was eliminated of one of the objectives and replaced with recognized inter-garrison road as a vehicular route, while providing the greater accommodation of pedestrian and bicycle traffic. And then the third change here was to delete the word utilize on an objective and replace it with fully evaluate the utilization of. And so those were the changes based on the friendly amendment. And it's all included in attachment A to the board report. And so that brings us back to the board recommendation for this month. So the recommendation is to take a second vote on last month's motion to approve the goals and objectives. And staff's available for any questions.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay, I'll open it up to the public. No public comment. Do I have a motion? Oh.
Mr. Chair, as a point of order, I did see a couple hands going up on the other side, so I'm not sure if...
Yeah, I'll get them when we're done with public comment. Okay, let me, I have someone standing at the podium. Well,
I can step back.
No, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, board members. I'm Richard Garza. I'm president of the Central Coast Veteran Cemetery Foundation Board of Directors. And for us, access to the Veteran Cemetery is important and will become more important as there are more interments at the cemetery over time. There needs to be another east-west connected road between the peninsula and the valley with help with regional traffic congestion, and as a resident of Oak Hills, I really feel that strongly. And local circulation on the former Fort Ord. The EIR process will look at alternates, routes, and potential impacts. The public's, I mean, just based on what was just shown, the public's going to have ample opportunity to comment, because we're not talking about a finished project, we're talking about a plan for a project. And in that context, I really want to urge the board to move forward with the EIR process, because unlike, I find it ironic that in a context where people are beating up on the President of the United States for waiving due process in favor of acting now, we're going to waive study and make a decision before the study is complete. And that seems backwards to me. Thank you.
Mike DeLappa with Landwatch. I just want to draw your attention to new information that our attorney provided you yesterday in the form of a letter. To summarize very quickly, the assumptions that underlie the EIR are flawed. If you go back to the base reuse plan, it's very clear that a regional analysis of transportation priorities is required. The mitigation, so-called mitigation of the road is not required, and the additional liabilities that this board will face on top of the $1 million plus that was spent on the last lawsuit, it's just mounting. So I would really encourage you to take a pause, to look at those legal requirements, to consider the assumptions, the base reuse plan, before you take this vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalie Sethi. So I just wanted to say that the plan for the East Side Parkway does not accomplish the goal of connecting to Highway 1 and Highway 68 and easing the traffic congestion from those highways. There are existing roadways within Fort Ord that need to be improved and would benefit the traffic flow without creating unnecessarily urban sprawl. I'd like to remind you about the parcel of land that's been selected here. It's a rare oak woodland wildlife corridor and outdoor recreation area the locals call Happy Trails. The landscape is a hybrid between the coastal dune environment and an oak woodland. The biologist who presented the last EIR of this land stated the environment is extremely rare, one of only a few examples in all of California. The peninsula communities share a common appreciation for the natural and diverse beauty that exists here. In order to preserve our way of life, we need to be stewards of the unique lands we hold dear. FORA can benefit our communities by 1, improving existing roadway infrastructure to increase traffic flow, and 2, preserving Happy Trails as the gateway to the Fort Ord National Monument. FORA board members, I'm asking you to please vote no on the East Side Parkway. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Grimian. I'm a resident of Schoonover Park. I work at the Seaside DoD Center, and my wife works at CSUMB. So we have a vested interest in the future of Fort Ord as far as construction and development. I think I came here today mainly to talk about what I think is possibly being neglected and ignored is what's going on around the East Side Parkway project, specifically with the TAMC projects, which I think is doing a really good job of potentially dealing with the regional transportation problems of widening Imgen Parkway and dealing with the intersection improvements on Highway 68. These are projects that are already on the books. As far as I know, these are funded. They're going through, and I haven't really heard them mentioned in discussions on the East Side Parkway. Additionally, when looking at the base reuse plan, my main note was East Side Parkway seemed to be intended as a forward serving roadway, and this has somehow taken this from what looked like Inner Garrison to Imgen Parkway initially as a roadway, as a throughway to get traffic away from the CSUMB campus and serve existing developments in the Fort Ord community to a more regional transportation corridor. And you know, in addition to that, I think what also isn't being addressed is the fact that we're probably going to see quite a few improvements to infrastructure with the Surplus 2 development Seaside, specifically with Giggling Road. Giggling Road can't get much worse. You know, there's got to be some development on it when this development comes in. I've gone to the charrettes for the city of Seaside. I've seen the plans. They look really good. There's going to be a lot of development down there. So I feel like as far as East Side Parkway, I think we're going in the wrong direction, and it's really in the wrong place, and I'd like to see it as a more Fort Ord serving roadway. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pete Scudder. I'm current chair of the Monterey County Business Council. But however, I'm here today speaking on behalf of an employer of about 75 people who commute daily on our roads here. About 98% of my employees commute into work each day. Most of them come from Salinas, other from Watsonville and Hollister. All of them are adversely affected by daily traffic. I'm here today to support the East Side Parkway, the regional East Side Parkway, and let me tell you why. Today the board has a great opportunity to help relieve some of the growing congestion problems that affect our quality of life. The regional parkway will relieve over 18,000 trips per day that impact our local roads currently. Some of the advantages are reduced carbon emissions. Traffic is not good for air quality. Zero of the Monterey comes from TAMZ or from the general fund. 100% of the cost is projected, of this project is captured from development fees through FORA and will be completely paid by 2024. Increases workforce productivity. City and traffic cost public agency as well as private businesses millions of dollars of lost productivity each year. Consumer traffic gridlock slows down our services and impacts cost services sold directly to the consumer. Less impact on our roads and streets, helping reduce infrastructure deterioration. These side roads are not engineered for large traffic loads. Emergency vehicle access and ambulance and fire and police to be able to let access to our emergency vehicles to be able to get to place to be able to to help people when they're in need. Time away from family and friends, personal stress level, and health and well-being. And not to mention, a no-build scenario results in overtaxing of 7 of our existing roadways. The Fort Ord footprint covers over 20,000 acres of the regional parkway and a 2-lane road that is about 4 miles long and utilizes only 30 acres of former Fort Ord. It includes bike paths, high-speed underground communications, tree and ground rehabilitation, creates more effective access for emergency vehicles. We have studied this for over 15 years, and I think enough is enough. Just recently, the state of California has rated California. The state of California was rated last in the McKinsey Company study as the worst state in regards of quality of life. Part of the study is about the cost of living, economy, and infrastructure, the difficulty of getting from point A to point B in a reasonable time. Attempting to control growth by restricting access and creating gridlock is not a good public policy. This project meets all the objectives and complies with the policies and programs for the reuse plan, and I say it's time to make this plan go forward. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Board. Thank you very much for your service to this community, and thank you very much for your service to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. My name is Kimberly Craig. I'm the President and CEO of the Monterey County Business Council, and I wanted to let you know that the Monterey County Business Council is a 100-member organization of businesses, nonprofits, and governments dedicated to forging cross-sector alliances to build a vibrant and prosperous Monterey County business community. We are in support of the Eastside Parkway. Transportation capability is a critical element to the regional economic success of our major industries in Monterey County. While we remain sensitive to the beauty of our area that makes Fort Ord a destination for bicyclists, hikers, and recreationalists, our baseline focus should be around ease of access to our workforce here and to visitors to the area. Currently, our hospitality industry is threatened by increasing traffic congestion in Monterey County, and the Eastside Parkway would allow some traffic relief to Highway 1, Imjin Parkway, and General Jim Moore Boulevard. We encourage you to move the Eastside Parkway project forward for the future success of economic growth in Monterey County. And I would just like to point out that yesterday was a shining example of where we need alternative methods to get around this county. Highway 1, just south of Reservation Road, was closed for 2 hours, both lanes, with people driving in circles through Fort Ord and trying to figure out an alternative route. That was a clear example that we need to be addressing transportation from a regional perspective from this point forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jody Hanson. I'm the President and CEO of the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. We submitted a letter in December. We still hold to that position in support of the Eastside Parkway. And at this point, if there is to be development on FORA lands, which we assume is the plan, which has been the plan since FORA's inception, and development includes housing and job sites and educational campuses, then we need the necessary infrastructure in place. Otherwise, traffic circulation doesn't work, and the road system, for that reason, needs to be completed. This is something that has been on the books since the beginning of FORA plans. It needs to be done, and we're beyond studying. We can find a way to make this work, and the alignments can be created that have the least impacts. We will be sued no matter what. It comes down to there is a difference of opinion regarding development. However, we urge you to set aside partisan politics and honor the promise made to the community. Environment, education, and economic recovery. You have not kept the promise of economic recovery. And completing construction of the roads will allow some development to happen on FORA lands. We urge you to move forward with the EIR process, and we thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Locke. I'm a resident of Pacific Grove, and I'm asking you to vote no today on the second vote, and here's why. I think that with the several issues that have been raised regarding the efficacy of this project, I think it would be wise and you would be more credible if you were to step back, reconsider, look at transportation plans, and then clearly we need something. Move forward with the general public behind you. Thank you.
My name is Bill Sabo. I'm a Monterey, City of Monterey citizen, and I'm also an elected board member of the airport district here in Monterey. And I want to speak in support of the goals and objectives of the Eastside Parkway. From the standpoint of the airport, our airport here in the Monterey Peninsula is a valuable resource for both the citizens and our industry. And right now, we at the airport, we're significantly stymied in our plans to grow the airport, grow the traffic, and even sustain ourselves into the future without proper access via the road network. And one of the key objectives of the so decided in the motion is integration with the local road network. And the congestion on Highway 68, which is the only access that our people from Salinas, our visitors or our users from Salinas and the Salinas Valley have, is Highway 68. And it prevents the congestion in the morning and in the evening, prevents them from seriously using our airport. Without this East Side Parkway development and alignment to improve access to the airport, we will have a significant problem at the airport. And so I support a positive vote for the current goals and objectives. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Mack. I'm going to make some comments about some of the comments made. One, East Side Parkway essentially is there right now in the existing roads. Inner Garrison to 8th to Giggling Road to Jones and more. The airport people going to and from Salinas should be able to use that access. The same with Pete Scudder's workers. We see a little rise in traffic on that route right now, but it's not that great. And the road's been open for about a year and a half. So speaking to, do we need an East Side Parkway, which Ralph Rubio said, the corridor is not a zigzag, but it's the direct line from point A to B, which would be Inner Garrison to Eucalyptus. Another comment that was made at the other FORA meeting was pretty disturbing when a couple members that were here at this board meeting and also at the TAMSI board meeting discredited and didn't give respect to TAMSI's data. TAMSI is an unbiased agency giving scientific data based on modeling. There's a comment made that the data was skewed, and we can understand why some people would be disappointed with that data. But I've been racking my brain for a few weeks now trying to understand why Seaside and Delray Oaks would want more traffic through their cities. If someone proposed a freeway through Carmel or Pacific Grove or Monterey, I think the mayors of those cities would oppose it. So I'm trying to figure out, where is the benefit to these cities? The other thing is the Seaside Parkway, the public has been unwavering in what they want this area to happen, what they want to have happen in this area. They wanted a parkland, they don't want it a parkway. They stood against Monterey Downs, unwavering for 8 years, and they'll stay unwavering against this. I think you as board members should listen to your constituents. They have a lot of good ideas. They're the ones who live here. I also ask the business people, what do they do outside of business? Have they ever walked in this area? Do they have a life outside of their businesses? Sure, it's important to get people to and from work, but there's other areas, other avenues. Transportation is going to change in the future. What's going to happen in 10 years, 15 years? Are we going to have more buses? Are we going to have more public transportation, carpooling, Uber-style ride sharing? What's going to happen? Right now, development is not happening in the East Side Corridor.
Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Thank you.
My name is Gary Curcio, Director of Government Affairs in Monterey County Hospitality Association. I originally was not going to speak today because I did speak at the last meeting. However, I think it's necessary that I respond to our last speaker. I am the individual that spoke at the TAMSI board, stating that TAMSI had made the presentation to this group and the airport board. I never once questioned the competency of TAMSI. That was not the reason for the discussion. The concern that myself and others, that recently 3 of us were mentioned in Mr. Calkin's blog, was that the TAMSI staff made that discussion without the TAMSI board reading the report or even approving them to make that. The other concern we had, and it is completely valid, is that the opposition was using the information and is using the information from the TAMSI report to go back to members of this board sitting here and use that in a manner to try to intimidate them into changing their vote. That is not false, it's a fact. Thank you.
George Riley, Monterey. I guess my biggest problem with this decision in front of you is that it was put on the books 20 years ago with the idea that it would fit with all the other development plans for Fort Ord. And yet those plans have not been fulfilled the way they have. The most recent engineering and professional review of the need for this came from TAMSI just recently. And they pointed out that there's no connector between the two ends of this proposed parkway. There's no data, or at least the volume of data that they had did not support it as relieving the traffic projections that had been made. And that the FORA is on the verge of going out of existence. You have no way of seeing this project through to completion. You have the need for the money elsewhere within your own jurisdiction. You propose to put this roadway in place instead of taking care of Blight when there are some options you have available to you. I just think you have a high priority given to a very low priority issue, and it's just looks like, doesn't look smart to me. Thank you.
My name is Cathy Anderson, and I really wasn't going to come up, but I've really been following this for some time, and I'm one of those folks that live out in Highway 68, and I've been commuting that road for 30 years, and it's not getting any easier. I was out there before they had the stoplights and the center lanes and such, taking my kids to school. My concern is that when we hear a siren and we're all bottlenecked out there, the safety reasons for that, for the concerns of getting people help when they're in need. So we have a safety issue. My other concern is if we get any more bottleneck coming to our peninsula, we're going to drive out our tourism. And once our tourism isn't here, we really have a problem. No water, no tourism, then we're going to have something to cry about. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, I'll bring it back to the board. You had a question, Ms. Adams?
Thank you. I was asking a question about one of our other tourist problem roads, 156. Forgive me, but so I'm not making my comments. I'm going back to asking the question. And the question that I wanted to ask is regarding the project goals and objectives themselves. Is it too late now at this point for us to amend or change any of the goals and objectives? We have to take them all just as they are. I would not be able to vote, say, for 8 out of 10.
We're re-voting, doing a second vote on the motion that was passed at the last meeting. So we can't do any amendments or no substitutions or.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Edelin?
Got to make a motion now?
Yeah.
I move that we take a second vote on to approve the East Side Parkway goals and objectives.
And Mayor Edelin, Chair, I wanted to respond to Mr. DeLapa's point about receiving a letter.
Let's get the second. And then
all right. I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. You had some comment.
Mr. DeLapa said that we received a letter from his attorney yesterday. I did not receive such a letter, and I'm not aware that FORA did. However, I did just check my email, and a letter did come in from Molly Erickson at 2:04, and I believe arrived here at FORA at 2:06.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Reimers. Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've received information, emails. I just wanted to acknowledge that I've been receiving and reading all of the information that's been coming to me. I made a statement of clarification at the council meeting in Carmel to help explain some of the details to anybody who was listening at that meeting. I'm going to be brief on my comments today, but one of the areas that I think needs to be clarified, and that simply is that the money for blight is not an either-or situation. The money for the removal of blight is actually the areas that most of us see from the highway. One area belongs to TAMC and MST, and my understanding is they plan to at some point use that property, and at that point TAMC or MST will take advantage and take care of the blight. The other is the area that's just up the hill from us here, and that is Marina's property, and they're in a contract with a developer, and that is the marina responsibility. So FORA is not spending money. It's not an either or, and I think that's an important distinction to make, that FORA has put it 80% or so of the blight removal that they're responsible for have taken care of. I'm one of the ones who would very much like to see East Side Parkway name changed, because it does suggest that the design has already been placed, and it has not. I want to make it very clear that this is the beginning of a process. Some of that was already mentioned today, and the objectives and goals outline what we all hope to achieve that will meet the needs of the community as a whole and the responsibility of FORA. What concerns me in one of the areas of consideration is safety, to be sure that we get a roadway so that we don't push cars into the neighborhoods on Fort Ord. We owe the people who live here the opportunity to have their neighborhoods safe, and a roadway that is well thought out should be able to provide that for them. 21 acres of Fort Ord will remain wild space and wild and open. And we have a huge responsibility to develop some workforce housing. The economy depends on it, and we need to be able to have access to the workforce housing locations. So those are the considerations that I could share tonight with you. I'm sure there are many others, but that I felt was appropriate for me to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of clarity, and based on what some of the speakers said, I want to make it clear that what we're asked to take a second vote on here are just the goals and the objectives in which this possible plan might support. It might turn out that there's others. This just gets it going. We are being asked to approve the goals and objectives. To approve the goals and objectives, which will support housing that we need, education, and economic development and traffic decongestion. And with that, so I'm hoping that's what I'm seconding here. And with that, I'd like to also find out from staff after the vote that do these goals and objectives support first responders getting into the further reaches of Fort Ord that might face what we've been seeing happen in Santa Rosa and other places in California. Thank you.
Mayor Gunter.
When they opened the National Veterans Cemetery, everybody was there to get their picture taken. Everybody was very proud. We've supported the veterans. But it's pretty sad we're going to make it so you can't get there even when you die. So maybe we need to think about that as we lay out this road, that however it is, and I don't think yet I have seen the map where we're going. And I think that's what this is all about today. This is not that we're going to go out and pave a road today. It's not that we're going to chop down any of those trees. It's a matter of necessity that we look at this in a very open mind. And I know there's people that have made up their minds. They do not want people at Fort Ord. I thought Fort Ord closed when they started their reuse plan, but obviously we still have the gate up. And we'll put some people on the marina side and some on the seaside side. We'll keep the people out, because that's what's going to happen. In this accident, I know someone that was stuck out there who said, wow, I sure wish we'd have had an alternative. I learned more about the roads at Fort Ord that went to nowhere trying to get to Seaside. So I really do think we owe the public the opportunity to determine We may do this study and find out it can't be done, but until we do it, we're foolishly wasting our time. Thank you.
Are there any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. Regarding the veteran cemetery, it's very important the public have access to it. We could extend eucalyptus about 10 feet to Parker Flats Cutoff, and that would provide access to the veteran cemetery. So going all the way through the monument is really not beneficial in that way. Secondly, this project has changed purpose over time, and that to me is problematic. Originally, if you read the base reuse plan, its purpose was on base. It was not intended to be a major regional traffic road. And at some point over the history of FORA, it has morphed into that. And so people are looking at it to solve problems on Highway 68 and Highway 1. Yet, we don't have any evidence that it's going to do that, quite the contrary. So what I would support, and what I supported last time, is FORA using its funds to work with TAMC to do a fresh study. Let's figure out what is the most efficient way to move people, and what is the most cost-effective way. How do we get the most bang for our buck? We do lack sufficient funds to do all of the blight removal that needs to be done. And so, it's not an either or, it is a choice of priorities, and this means that blight will continue to remain for many years while we build a road whose purpose and function are really not clearly defined.
If you're suggesting making that as a substitute motion, I would certainly second it.
You can't do a substitute motion. We're voting on this.
So substitute motion is not accepted since this is the second vote?
Right.
That's correct?
That's right. Well, if it fails, then we start over. A new motion, yeah.
I'd like to go ahead and make my comments, though.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I very much support what you have just said, Alan, and I must say that I echo a lot of the same sentiments. I don't think there's a person in this room that does not want to see traffic alleviated from Highway 68 specifically. Not only are we concerned about the workers, we're concerned about safety. All of us share that same point. But I must say, from my own personal perspective, I'm not convinced that this approach is the way that it's going to happen. A couple of things that I've been conscious of is that I think a lot of people who are sitting around this table have been looking at this the same way for such a long time that they feel that there is dishonor in changing their minds toward what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. And I feel that if we don't make some change, we're never going to grow. When someone made the comment that it's either just against development or for development, I so take offense at that. Because again, if we were able to have development here where we have affordable housing for the workforce that we have, people who can, the people who are stuck out on Highway 68, if they were able to afford to buy housing here, then I think we would be completely on the right track. All of those things add together to making me feel that I wish that I could approve all of the goals and objectives except for the very first one, which is to provide a primary southwest northeast corridor through the former Fort Ord. I'm not convinced that that is the place for it. I think we need to have, we need to look at the roundabouts that are planned. In my mind, I think we ought to have something that you get on at Blanco and 68 and you get off at Highway 1. Boom, a straight shot. I think that would do a lot to alleviate the traffic, but I don't think anybody's taken a look at that because nobody's looking at anything other than this limited situation in which we find ourselves. So thank you for your time.
Ms. Morton and Director Ely.
So thank you. I would echo what Director Hoffa and Director Adams have just said. And what concerns me is that it is not a question of development, no development, road, no development. The question and our responsibility is prioritization. And we have set forth a procedure that's recited in our CIP every year that we reiterate and restate that tells us what we need to consider in setting our priorities, and it has criteria for how we set those priorities. Unfortunately, we have in the CIP in Appendix A stated the FORA board has set the two top transportation priorities as East Side Parkway and South Boundary Road. Those prioritizations were set in 2009. The design and what's happening on former Fort Ord, what our projects are currently, where the growth and the traffic impacts are happening, are inconsistent with what was happening in 2009. I support that we relook at these priorities, be it blight, that might be one of the priorities that should be put forward, but we do have limited time, and the money that we're allocating in the next 2 years to put it towards this road as opposed to some of the other roads that are in our CIP that we will need to do. It's the order in which you do them. I also want to indicate that the blight removal is part of what we need to fund, part of what we need money for. It's the city, it's not the city of Marina's responsibility to remove this blight. It's the developer, Marina Community Partners, and Marina and the FORA. We still have an outstanding obligation that we have not paid. 44 of the 44 million we're obligated to pay, $21 million, and that's not appearing in our budget and how we're going to come up with the funds to do that. As to the TAMSI involvement, I would direct everybody's attention to section 4.2.2.5 of the Fort Ord Reuse Plan, Streets and Roads, Policies and Programs. Every single paragraph in this under the policies and programs of an objective of an efficient regional network of roadway that provides access to the former Fort Ord talks about TAMSI, TAMSI's transportation models, its regional modeling, its updating of those modeling. That is what TAMSI brought to us. We have a coordination with TAMSI for that reason, because they are experts, they're neutral parties, and it is not a political process. It's trying to keep us informed so we can address our prioritizations. The admin committee has not reviewed the priority of Eastside Parkway or East Boundary Road since 2000, South Boundary Road since 2009. That was a board policy. The board in 2009 set that. This is the 2018 board. If this motion fails, there's the opportunity to renew what Director Parker had made a motion last meeting, which was, let's take a moment, let's relook at our prioritization consistent with what we have in our CIP project directives on how we do that, what we're trying to do to answer to the public, and let's take the moment to do that. Thank you.
Director Eland and Director Kemp.
Yep. All we're being asked to do today is to approve the goals and objectives, basically motherhood and apple pie, the framework by which we're going to move forward. Right after we approve this, then we go through the California Environmental Quality Act process. We will look at the corridor, the routes, where the road should be built, if the road should be built. That's when we go through all. In fact, every comment that was made right here against the building of this parkway could be analyzed under CEQA, will be brought back before this board for other consideration in the future. The bottom line is we only have 2 more years until FORA sunsets. There are 2 major transportation projects on the capital improvement program. This is one of them. We need to get moving fast. If we started right now, and if we got a CEQA through in a very efficient manner, we might get something done. If we start delaying and go through study after study after study, ain't nothing to be done. So I'd like us to move forward on this thing. Let's start CEQA, have these intelligent conversations. We have some very good comments made by everybody here. Let's analyze that input at that time and try and come up with a good compromise so we can get some traffic going between Salinas and Seaside Marina and back and forth. Otherwise, we're going to have gridlock even worse than we have right now.
Thank you, Chair Rubio, and my apologies in the sense that as an alternate sitting in for the first time on this topic, I may touch on things that have already been well covered by everybody. But certainly at our city council about 2 weeks ago, we were urged to share our thinking. And I'd like to relate that experience and what it prompted in my learning to try to understand as much as I can this particular topic. We had quite a number of people come to our city council, and the three things that stuck in my mind as the comments at the podium were that this must be evaluated based on regional impact. That furthermore, the TAMC study shows that it doesn't help in the sense that only 6,900 regional trips per day would cross through this road, and it would have no improvement on Highway 68. Not quite mentioned was that it might help on Imjin Parkway and Route 1. And the final thought, and this was repeated several times, it doesn't help Pacific Grove. Look at a map. And I've looked at the map. What was suggested is that the PG City Council, and I would say with strong urging, and that's the kindest label I could put on it, that we should direct our representative to change their vote on this particular topic. And kind of the summary was, and what we also heard at our podium, nobody wants this project, why aren't you listening? And I hope I have been listening, and I listened at this podium as well. One thing that's very clear is that there are a range of views on this, some very strong on one side, very strong on another. But I went back and thought about the 3 points that were iterated. And by the way, the letter from, I believe it was John O'Farrell, who emphasized in his letter, and he quoted one of the goals and objectives, and he said it's mandatory that this be evaluated based on regional impact. And that caused me to go back and look at the objectives as stated in that document, and you read from that area. So I would like to read one of the other things, because it didn't ring right in the way it was written. Why is every project evaluated on that criteria? There is also, that was objective, I think, A.12 or 21 or some such thing. Objective C, provide a safe and efficient street system at the former corridor. And within that, there are two key sentences. The roadway system must provide access to areas identified for redevelopment and do so as directly and efficiently as possible. Part of efficiency is recognizing that different roads will serve different functional purposes. And that is also a criteria for evaluating a roadway project. And based on the base reuse plan, it seems to me a totally appropriate one. So that was kind of point one. And I felt that what we were hearing was somewhat of a skewed representation of the key criteria. Number two, the TAMC study. I did look at the TAMC study, and I've talked to folks from TAMC. And yes, it's 6,900 cross-FORA trips on a cross-region basis. What has not been mentioned, was not mentioned at our city council, is that it also shows 1,800 or 18,000 trips per day on that roadway, and the other, I think it's 12,000 or so, are 11,000, are originated within FORA to other parts outside of FORA, or completely within FORA. Again, totally appropriate for Objective C. And it seems to me that on that basis, this is not in conflict with any of the goals of FORA to proceed in that way. But it was point number three that gnawed at my mind most. And point number three, it doesn't help Pacific Grove. Look at a map. And so I looked at the map, and I kind of knew it doesn't help Pacific Grove. I've been in this chair previously, and I have participated in a lot of discussions that don't help Pacific Grove, and I voted for them. And here's the thing that really strikes me, is if every jurisdiction around this table evaluates every action based on what does it do for me, and how do I make sure that it's my fair share, maybe a little bit more than my fair share, as the sole criteria for a vote, we would have no basis for any accomplishment in this project for trying to reuse this space. We could never pass anything. And in fact, the way we gain equity is over a period of time, as different projects come up, that the sum of those projects provides the level of equity that we need to ensure that all of the objectives are met based on the criteria and all of the jurisdictions have some reasonable benefit. My take on this, and I don't claim to be as expert as many people around the table, is that this is time to give some consideration for those communities south of CSUMB for a project that sets the stage for appropriate economic development in that area. We've done well on education, we've done well on environment, and I think it's absolutely reasonable to establish these objectives. And by the way, I know that we could wordsmith the objectives for a very long time. I'm refraining from my own editorial comments, but I support the action to move forward on these goals and objectives because I think there is an important role for this as part of the regional equity that we need to make the best use of the former corridor. Thank you, Chair Rubio. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I acknowledge that there may be a number of different ways to bring people through and into the interior of Fort Ord. That is probably an obvious statement, but I haven't heard any others besides this particular project on the table. I want to share with the group to make sure we reminded some new members here. One of the plans that MPC has for the land on the former Fort Ord is to build an emergency vehicle operations course. First responder leads, chiefs from around the county and outside of the county have approached me about this. There is no sufficient emergency vehicle operations course for training our first responders anywhere close, with the exception of the Marina Airport. And I'm talking about first responder training coming down from San Jose to use that. I'm the chair of the board of the South Bay Regional Public Safety Training Consortium, trains over 2,000 students a year. They drive from the Coyote Valley Center of Gavilan College in San Jose down to the Marina Airport to get that training. So whether it's this road or some other road and some other path that we learn after doing a study, but we need to have access. The emergency vehicle operations course is planned for a site that has no oak trees. It's not going to bring a lot of money to MPC. It's a regional service. And that board that I chair includes 9 community colleges, including Hartnell, Cabrillo, and Gavilan College. So our neighbors all need this. So I urge you to please consider going forward with the study, learn what you can, and if you find that you can't put East Side Parkway through, we need another alternative. So thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and take the vote.
Chair,
roll call vote. Please.
Chair, can I just acknowledge for the record my receipt from Ms. Jane Haynes just while I was sitting here, the letter dated March 8th from Mr. John Farrow at M.R. Wolf and Associates in San Francisco. A letter apparently was sent via email yesterday to the board of directors. I don't know if any of the board received it, but I think that was the letter that Mr. Lapa was acknowledging. So I just wanted to acknowledge my receipt of it by hand today.
Okay, thank you.
If I just comment on that, let's make sure that Mr. Giffen is on the distribution list at board at FORA, so that when we get sent a letter, he gets it as well.
Okay, let's take a roll call vote, please.
Director Parker? Director Phillips? Yes. Director Adams? Director Edelin?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Morton? Yes. Director Hoffa?
No.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Alexander?
Yes.
Director Carbone? Yes. Director Gunter?
Yes.
Director Camp?
Yes.
Director Reimers?
Yes.
You have 8 yeses.
Motion passes. Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is 8B, fiscal year 2017-18 mid-year budget section 115 trust. Mr.
Chair,
Lomar.
members of the board, we under this item we have two questions for the board to consider. The first would be to adopt the Fort Ord Reuse Authority mid-year budget approving Finance Committee recommended additional expenditures, and then authorize the executive officer to negotiate the associated contracts that would be required to move forward with the Section 115 trust. We have representatives from our colleagues from PARS that are here today to make a presentation. Before they begin, I want to note to the members of the board that you did receive an amended board report that clearly indicated what we were talking about in terms of expenditures, and some of those concerns are reflected on the attachment as well. So we just want the board members to know the actual net increase in expenditures is the $586,000 that were recommended be spent to retire a portion of the unfunded actuarial liability, not the item that you saw earlier. So if I could, Helen, is there anything else we need to pay attention to? Okay. I'd like to now introduce our colleague. Rachel, would you like to begin your introduction?
Absolutely, thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairman of the Board, members of the board. My name is Rachel Sanders, and I work for PARS, Public Agency Retirement Services. With me today is Randall Yurchak, and he works for Highmark Capital Management. So our intent today is to give you an overview of the program that is being recommended, and that is an establishment of a 115 trust. So let me start by briefly giving you an overview of what a 115 trust is for those that may be less familiar with it and what its intended purpose is. So a 115 trust is really a trust that can be used at a local government level to fund essential governmental functions, which would include anything from retiree medical obligations to, in this case, pension obligations. So a 115 trust is irrevocable in nature, meaning that once money goes in with the intention of being utilized for pension costs only, it can only be withdrawn from the trust for those pension costs. So it can't be used for anything besides the intended use. So that really gives the jurisdiction peace of mind for the intended use of those pension obligations in the future. Now, PARS does have an IRS private letter ruling for this pension rate stabilization program. We got that in 2015. So it does also shore up the tax exempt status of the trust. You have the peace of mind that this is a compliant trust. Now, let me give you a little bit more information about the three entities that are involved in the administration of this trust. So as mentioned, I work for PARS, and PARS serves as the trust administrator and ongoing consultant. So PARS, as I mentioned, got a private letter ruling to offer up this program for pre-funding pension obligations back in 2015. We are the pioneer of this program and the market leader. So there are a couple other companies that also offer this, but PARS certainly has the most clients that are currently in this program. 130 California agencies to date have adopted this program. We also have more than 300 member agencies in our trust that are pre-funding both pension and OPEB. This is really our core competency at PARS. So we are trust administrators. That is our niche core business, and so we're very competent in the ability to do the ongoing administration. Now, what PARS does not do is actually handle the money. We're not a financial institution. So our trustee services fall to U.S. Bank there in the middle. U.S. Bank is the 5th largest bank in the nation. They provide the custodial services. So they provide the oversight, protection, and safeguard the assets within the trust. And then one unique feature of a 115 trust that I haven't mentioned yet is that you are allowed to invest differently in a 115 trust than you do in your general fund. So once funds are moved over into a 115 trust, there is a different government code that applies to investing. So suddenly you can invest in equities, diversify funds as long as you're investing in a prudent manner. So that again allows you to potentially eke out some more potential return than you could if the assets were sitting in the general fund. So that brings us to the last of our three partners, Highmark Capital Management. And for that, I will introduce Randy to talk a little bit about his company and what their role in this is.
Thanks, Rachel. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm from Highmark Capital. We are the investment advisor in the relationship, And so what our goal is to first understand what your goals, objectives, risk tolerances, time frame is for the investments, and then we devise a plan that caters to to your needs. So we offer 5 different basic investment objectives, anywhere from conservative to aggressive. They're toggled based on amount of equity is in it, so in other words, how much risk you're taking. But one point is that to make, it's a really important point, is that based on your asset size, we are able to actually do a customized solution. So it's where we're actually investing individual fixed income securities and potentially individual equities to really custom tailor the plan or the investment plan to your needs. So it's very targeted and very specific to what you're trying to accomplish. So with that, we wanted to make it pretty brief and open up to questions because we didn't know exactly what direction you guys wanted to take. So feel free to ask.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think part of the idea behind the Forward Reuse Authority thinking about placing monies for employee retirement with PARS and your partners is that there might be a mechanism by which the money would grow at a greater rate, or it would be a better place to park the money than the bank or some other. So could you talk about how you maximize that benefit and reduce the risk of it going the opposite direction?
Sure. I'm assuming your general fund may return somewhere around 1.1%-ish. Oh, lower. Okay. Less than 1%. Okay. So given the time frame that I believe that you were talking about here, 2 to 3 years, if that's indeed the time frame, there are fixed income securities, very high grade quality securities in the market that we can purchase, and that maturity length whereby they might go up and down throughout the time period. Interest rates go up, the bonds prices go down. That's the general rule. So if interest rates, if we implement this plan tomorrow, your return is going to be multiples of what you're getting in the general fund, and your investment, the principal amount may fluctuate up and down, but at maturity you will likely, with high degree of likelihood, get the entire money back. And throughout the entire time, you'll be earning the coupon on the fixed income investment. So that's the idea behind it. Unfortunately, I can't give you 100% surety on those fixed income securities that we're buying, but there's a high degree of likelihood that you'll achieve that return that we're looking at today in the market.
So is this pre-funding for a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan? That's the first question.
Yes, good question. Defined contribution. So this is not a defined benefit plan. This is really to pre-fund the defined benefit plan through CalPERS.
So when actual retirements occur to withdraw from this, the employees get something related to whatever they contributed.
Right. So really, you can kind of think of this as a holding place for those pension obligations. And so they would be getting their regular CalPERS retirement, but this is to really ensure that the retirement obligation can be paid off because the money is within the trust to be able to draw down when it comes time to pay CalPERS that money. So it's not going directly to the retirees. It would be reimbursed directly to FORA or directly to CalPERS. So I hope that helps to clarify.
And if FORA doesn't exist at that point in time and there's not enough money to pay PERS obligation, and I don't even know if that's a question for you necessarily, but what are the consequences?
Sure, and I guess the part that I can speak to is certainly any of the money in the trust is earmarked. It's, again, an irrevocable trust, so all of that money can be used to pay CalPERS. Beyond that, whatever additional monies might be owed to CalPERS, that's something out of my control. But yes, that is the intention of the trust, is to preserve those funds and hopefully grow the assets as well.
So 9 years ago, we saw a economic collapse. We're seeing Congress deregulating the investment world right now. Is there any kind of, obviously investments can fluctuate, I understand that risk, but is there any kind of insurance for our investment, or are we liable should US Bank or Highmark or PARS go bankrupt or get involved in some kind of economic crisis?
Do you want to? Well, I'll start, and maybe you can jump in. Yeah. So the nature of a 115 trust again is that this is ultimately your plan's benefit obligations that have been pre-funded. So if PARS as a company were to collapse, or U.S. Bank or Highmark, certainly there would just exist a trust-to-trust transfer. Those assets are protected, and again, we have the IRS private letter ruling saying that those assets are indeed to be utilized for the intention of our member agencies' pension obligations. Now, in terms of the investments, since Randy's with me, I'll let him speak to that question.
Right, and I mean, if U.S. Bank went out of business or Highmark went out of business, I mean, the assets would still be there, right? I mean, it's just because the company's there. We're an investment advisor. We don't have access to your funds. U.S. Bank is the one, and as the trustee, they're obviously not going to dip into it. It's not going to be like a Madoff situation. With respect to your question about the investments, yes, they do go up or down. I was referring to when I initially mentioned the fixed income investments. I was talking about now these investments are different from equities, of course, right? As you know, and they're going to fluctuate less, and likely at maturity you will get your money back, especially because we're investing high grade. I mean, we're buying Apple and not like Enron. So I can't unfortunately give you the 100% assurance that you'll get your money back, but in fact, in a lot of cases, those securities are trading cheaper than treasuries. So in other words, the market believes that they're more creditworthy than the U.S. government. I.e., my confidence is fairly high that you'll get your principal back and you'll collect the coupons along the way.
Okay, Director Camp, then Director Clark. Thank you, and I'm not even sure how to frame the question, but just check a couple things. If we have a 115 trust and the market goes up and we have some stock, for instance, so the value of this fund goes up, but the value of the CalPERS assets also goes up and our unfunded liability goes down. Is that correct?
That could happen.
And vice versa. So if it's a bad year for the market, we don't do very well, and CalPERS does bad and the unfunded liability shoots way up, and we've kind of stagnated. I guess what I'm kind of getting at is, in creating this trust, beyond the feeling of somehow we've done good for ourselves by segregating this money out, is there anything that says that financially we have gained relative to simply paying the CalPERS unfunded liability as it's billed to us on an annual basis?
Yeah, great question. And this is a question that comes up often. I think really the beauty of a 115 trust is the aspect of local control. So the trust allows you to determine how much you put in, when you put that money in, and when you withdraw those funds, again, assuming that they are being used to pay pension obligations. Once you send the money to CalPERS, it's completely out of your control. I'm sure it's well known that CalPERS is continuing to lower the discount rate. They lowered it from 7.5 to 7. There are plans in the future to go lower than that. And if you don't want to take sort of that wild ride with their exposure to a large amount of equities, this gives you an opportunity to invest your money in a little bit more of a conservative way. Now, granted, it won't directly lower your unfunded liability, which I think is a fair point, but having funds in a trust is an overall offset for GASB 68 to your liabilities. It's not, you can't lower your net pension liability on your balance sheet, but it is assets within a trust do affect overall balance sheet liabilities. So it is something, again, where you keep the control, and a lot of agencies like that rather than sending it to CalPERS where you have no say in how it's invested and whatnot.
So let me follow up on a really speculative question. Let's suppose that there's money in the trust, stock market's doing really well, CalPERS liability goes down, value of the trust goes up, FORA sunsets, and lo and behold, by magic, there's money left in the trust, and CalPERS is completely paid off.
Great question.
Where does the money go?
Yep, in that case, and it actually states in our legal documents that any funds in the trust above and beyond the pension obligations would revert back to the employer. So at that point, the money would go back to FORA.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if it's time for comment, but if I can just inject one thought of anxiety, the illusion of local control
the other view of this is a really wonderful way to have CalPERS get people to set aside money to ensure their good fortune, perhaps at the expense of local roads and other projects that really need to be done. And that's why I'm kind of curious about why there's clearly a financial benefit, not simply this sense of control benefit to the trust. So that's rhetorical for now. I'm still struggling with that for our jurisdiction. Thank you.
Okay, Director Moore.
So, kind of related to this, if FORA goes away, what happens to the trust? Because there would be no entity to receive any excess monies. There would be no entity to guide investment decisions. What do your trust documents say?
Right. So if FORA were to sunset, ultimately the funds in the trust would go to CalPERS to pay off the final pension obligations. Assuming that there was money in excess of that, then it would revert back to, at that point, I'm not sure who would be in receipt of the money if FORA had sunset, so I'd assume that the jurisdictions would ultimately determine the use of those excess funds.
But would that happen immediately upon, or within a few months of the sunset of FORA?
Yes. Yes, it would. So ultimately, FORA would contact us if they were planning to sunset. They would let us know what the total cost would be to send to CalPERS to pay off their pension obligations. We would utilize all funds in the trust, assuming that they meet that amount that they were looking for, and anything above and beyond that would revert back to FORA.
So if we bought 20 or 30-year bonds and FORA sunsets in 2020, in 2 years, that could be a bad time depending on what happens to the market.
Sure, and I think that to that point, we take into account time horizon, and as Randy mentioned, that's part of the conversation to have with Highmark is what are we thinking, the duration is that these funds will be invested so that we can plan for that and ensure that you're an investment selection that makes sense.
It's certainly a good thing we know exactly when FORA will sunset, isn't it?
Yeah.
Director Edelin.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on Mayor Camp's comment and try and simplify it down where I can understand it. I think fact number one is FORA will sunset in 2 years. Okay. Fact number two, the FORA staff has wisely set aside enough money in an account to pay off all of our CalPERS obligations when we sunset in 2 years. That's exactly what. So right now we're good. This is a great idea. We're getting half a percent. We're going up to 2% perhaps, assuming. The danger is that right now we can pay off those retirement obligations. If for some reason all hell breaks loose and the market collapses or whatever else, and we lose a lot of money there, that means there's an obligation that's left to all the land use everybody at this table at the end. We take those obligations we still owe, and we divide them up based on the number of votes we have here at the FORA board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so again, the threat or if the market collapses, we go from not having an obligation as a member of this board to maybe having an obligation, maybe a substantial obligation as a member of this board if the market goes down. So just so everybody understands that.
Yeah, so to piggyback on what Mayor Edelin just said, is that we've set aside, as the Finance Committee has planned for this and brought to the board, and every year you have approved as a board, that we have set aside the funding to fund our long-term liability. And we have 2 years. So what concerns me about this trust is I have cost of trust administration by PARS, I've got U.S. bank fees, and I've got Highmark gets paid. And so even if you're able to change my less than 1% to a 2% return, what are the costs of all of these agencies in managing this? And because of the volatility of the market, 2 years, most of us understand when we're investing in Apple stock or other investments that we're not doing day trading. We're doing long-term investment. Right. So if we have to pay this, while you might have a very stellar plan, I think that your plan meets the needs of cities and jurisdictions that don't have a sunset date. And I think I want to ask our finance director is, can we just pay PERS? Take our $7 million and just give it to PERS. And if we pay it today, do we save anything? If we pay it in 2018, do we save anything? Or if we pay part of it, can we save anything? As opposed to looking for outside increased interest, but that has additional costs.
That's correct. Unfortunately, CalPERS does not allow us to pay the full termination liability. First of all, that termination liability on our annual valuation report is an estimate. It's their best estimate at the time. And it's usually 2 years in arrears, as a matter of fact. The other situation is, having spoken to CalPERS, this is actually one of the best mechanisms for securing that the pension obligation is available when we terminate. So let me just walk you through some of the termination process. So before FORA sunsets, we have 1 year to notify CalPERS of our intent to terminate. Having said that, CalPERS would like for us to give them 18 months notice, and the reason for that is during the last 6 months, once they process that final termination liability, if they have any other situations or the amount that they guesstimate is over the amount that they provide to us, it gives them time to process and who to bill or who to return funds to. Now, the fact that we say we're going to terminate doesn't obligate us to terminate if FORA decides not to terminate, but it gives us an opportunity to find out what our true termination liability is. So CalPERS actually endorses a Section 115 trust, because that's the only way, the only mechanism they have to pre-fund our liability without it actually going to CalPERS.
But we can pre-fund it, which
Yes,
we've done.
we can pre-fund it. However, what even CalPERS has told me is that the Section 115 trust, depending on who your trust advisor is and who your investment advisor is, has typically increased in value faster than what CalPERS has.
Right, but if our obligation is owed in 2 years, we don't have that duration of time for this to happen, and we haven't heard anything about cost and what all of this additional expenses versus the return on it.
Right. So typically, this trust is set up so that the investment earnings are higher than the cost. So typically, and Rachel, you can speak to this.
We all set them up like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of cost, to your point, this is all based on assets within the trust. So for assets under $5 million, the highest fees that would be assessed for PARS, US Bank, and Highmark would be 60 basis points, or 0.6%, and it goes downward from there. So in fact, with certain fee breaks that are implemented, it's closer to 57 or 58 basis points. We've done our best guess at how much you're paying for CalPERS to do the pension administration is 70 basis points. So this is actually even a little bit less expensive than sending more money to CalPERS. Did you want to
a very important point here. So when we're talking about investments, there's lots of different types, right? There's equities. I think when you're talking about the market declining, you say the stock market, right? What I presented, what I was leaning towards was creating a portfolio of investment securities that mature in 2 years. I can go out in the market right now and buy 2-year treasuries for over 2%. Our fees are 50. Unless you think the federal government is going to go out of business, then it's better than what you're getting now. Does that make sense? Okay.
So just to add to that, currently our investments are earning at our bank 30 basis points only. And that's the best rate we can get right now at other banks. So.
Any other questions? Okay, I want to open it up to the public. Any public comment or any questions? I know it makes your head spin, doesn't it? I sat on a pension trust with several $1 billion of assets and going through this quarter. So it strikes a familiar bell. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board.
Chair.
Yes, yes, sir.
One thing nobody's talked about is what will each of these agencies owe if PERS continues at the rates we're going and we don't make some money? How much will each share cost you? Marina will owe 2 shares. Monterey County will owe 3 shares. Salinas will owe 1 share. And at one time the number was somewhere in the 600,000. I believe right now we're looking at about $800,000 apiece. We literally don't have enough money in there as it stands. We need more money in there. I realize that all of our expenses are important, but $5 million is not going to save us unless we grow the money. And that's why the Finance Committee looked at this as an investment for an opportunity to relieve some of that burden from every agency. And I don't know if Monterey County has an excess of cash from their marijuana tax, but if they do, maybe they could invest it in paying off the PERS debt for FORA.
Mr. Ely.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the executive officer to negotiate associated contract documents for board review and approval at a future meeting for FORA to participate in the public agency's post-deployment benefits Section 115 trust program. I'd like to add to that, however, that when this is brought back before the board, that the same documents were provided to the executive committee showing each one of the various areas could be invested in, each year, how much that one of those were made or lost, so that this board can see what the potential liabilities we have. I think that's information that the board should have.
Second that.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any more comment or questions? Yes, sir.
Mayor Elam, does your motion include looking at a review or adoption of a future investment policy change?
Yes.
I think what they've recommended is within the investment policy currently. So if needed, we'll bring that back.
That's fine, please.
Okay, everybody understand the motion? Yes.
Just for clarification, we were expecting a PERS statement estimated of our liabilities as of 2018. What is that number? Did we get that report?
Yes, the 2018 comes out sometime in November, August to November, depending on when CalPERS does that.
So we don't have it yet?
That's correct.
Okay. And we have 5.7 set aside.
We have 7.3 million set aside right now.
Much?
7.3 million the board has set aside. We are looking to fund 5.7 million, which is the lower end of the termination liability, less the 586,000 that we're looking to fund the current unfunded liability, which is the maximum we can send to CalPERS at this point.
Okay, any other questions?
Does your motion also include sending the 586,000 forward to CalPERS now?
What was the staff recommendation?
Can we break this motion apart?
Yeah, let's break it apart. Just
please.
Okay, so
I'll make a motion. We pay the $586,000 in the mid-year budget report to PERS to move us forward.
okay, will you accept that friendly amendment? There's a.
We have to do them separately.
He just added to the motion. Okay, so we got it all?
I thought we were going to try to separate them.
Okay.
Because
all right.
Should be separate. It should be separated, so we have to approve our mid-year budget report.
Okay,
and then
so
we can do the investment policy. So if you want to vote on that, and then I'll bring back and I'll make my motion.
Okay, let's vote on the first motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So that means we have to bring it back next month.
Now I'd like to make a motion. We pay the $586,000 and do our mid-year report, sir.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. The next item is economic development report. Mr. Metz.
Thank you, Chair, board members, and community members who stuck around for the economic development update. I'm happy to bring this to you, and since I'm only here quarterly, I do include some slides that maybe some of you have seen before, just to review, to show you what our strategic direction is. I'll give you some updates on some metrics that we normally report on, and then mention a few interesting and potentially exciting things that we've been working on most recently. So this is our program here, and included with more traditional economic development, these three in the middle, we include a university liaison role and a focus on activating real estate development here on Fort Ord, former Fort Ord. These are our strategic programs, and including building on our regional strengths of agriculture, tourism, hospitality, military, homeland security, higher education, and technology more and more, engaging our regional partners, developing information resources, pursuing new business, and reporting what we're doing. So you've seen this chart before, and it includes some recent updates from the last report. And I've also updated it to show the units here, because in interpreting the chart, it helps to know that some places we're talking about money spent on a program, other places we're talking about number of units that have actually been removed or reused, and other places we're talking about habitat acres that have been transferred. And these numbers are updated in this chart, and you can find all of this online at ordforward.org. So this is our housing starts, and this is the most recent update. We're pretty close to on track for our projected 258 units for the fiscal year. We're at 171 units through our office. This is based on the number of building permits that are paid across four different developments, major developments. That's East Garrison, two projects in Sea Haven, and then the Dunes. So this is all where we're at. Total CFD revenues collected year to date. So we've recently completed our job survey, and this year we're showing continued growth. Sorry, let's see here, 9%. And part of this is due to our increasing ability to contact and get responses from the employers on the former Fort Ord, and also some known job growth, particularly related to the developments here in Marina. We will be producing a final report that has all the details in the next quarter, probably in the next month. We'll have that online, where you can also find all that at ordforward.org. So I did want to comment on the progress that's been made also in the growth of the regional economic development capacity. Since we started this program, I was hired in this position in 2015, and since then each one of these organizations here have grown in capacity through personnel investments, and I work with members of each of these organizations in various capacities to advance initiatives. So I think it reflects the regional recognition of the value of economic development, and a lot of the activity that we're seeing is a result of the collaborations that we've established. And I just want to highlight a few. These diagrams reflect some of the project work that I've focused on the last few months, including supporting the City of Seaside and processing, working with their developers to clarify their campus town plans, also at Main Gate, and we work with them in various capacities through our office to help those projects advance. Also, the UC MBEST properties here have remained a clear focus of our work, and particularly around the City of Marina's airport, we've had some really exciting things develop. And in fact, I was last night on my way back from the city of Baltimore, where I'd spent the week at a FAA conference that was directly related to some initiatives that are developing for potential projects at the city airport. I'll touch on those in more detail in just a couple moments here, but I did want to bring back our work with the CSUMB and the Startup Monterey Bay. The Startup Challenge is underway, and the closing date for participation, getting applications in, is coming up March 12th. Along with a focus on the Startup Challenge, we're also supporting all of these entrepreneurship activities which allow the region broadly to cultivate new business opportunities, which all will feed into new job growth in the months and years ahead. We're also working on another initiative with CSUMB to advance this idea of Monterey Bay as an ecotourism and recreation region, sort of becoming the Costa Rica of California. And that work includes identification and alignment of tourism and hospitality assets that are already in place, and activating a broad marketing program. So we're working on a new website and some analysis with professors and engagement with the business community on this, the MCCVB. So I was just at the FAA conference in Baltimore, and I went there because in the fall, in November, I was made aware of this opportunity to respond to a call from the FAA for what's known as the Unmanned Aerial Systems, UAS, otherwise known as drones, Integration Pilot Program. And this was brought to my attention by one of our local entrepreneurs who is focused in using drones for infrastructure inspections. And what they are looking to do is to create centers of excellence and innovation for drone business around the country, and the use of drones not only in business but in public sector applications as well. So we saw this as an opportunity to leverage the facilities at the Marina Airport, both the existing facilities and the planned business developments within the city's business park area and UC Best, as a way to potentially attract some exciting new companies here. And so we were able to contact the city through support from Gail and others at the city to work with them to become a lead applicant on this program. And we put together a pretty exciting proposal. You can read about it at a website. It's actually on ordforward.org. You can find it by looking up MontereyBayUAS.com. It'll take you right there. It lays it all out. And we brought together a team of private and public sector organizations to make this happen. But just so you're aware, these are some numbers about the expected growth of the UAS market worldwide. It's expected by 2025 to be in the $12.6 billion industry. So right now in the US, it's shown here, it's about a $3.5 billion industry. So it's set to grow significantly. And the FAA is looking for private companies to engage with to help advance the safe and secure use of drones in the federal airspace. And so this conference was all about that. We had leadership from the big companies, Google, Amazon, as well as the top FAA people and the top policy people there, really encouraging companies and local jurisdictions to work together to advance these opportunities. And this is another way to look at the commercial market breakdown in the U.S. projected through 2022. That includes agriculture in blue, energy in black, government uses, media and entertainment, and other. And again, this is millions of dollars. This is about $1 billion here. So one of these market segments that's set to grow. And it does fit within our region. You know, we talk about wanting industries that fit what we do here well. And the use of drones is used in each of these areas. The blue economy dealing with marine resources. Our proposal recognizes our proximity to the Pacific Ocean. As an opportunity, ag tech, the Salinas Valley, environmental research, that's all of our university partners, resource management, public safety, homeland security infrastructure, education, creative arts, and entrepreneurship. So this is the team that we put together that responded to this proposal, and it certainly includes the city. Thanks again to Frank and Gail for supporting our connection with the staff and encouraging us to work together. The CSUMB, University of California, Santa Cruz, but also through this effort we were able to get Janet Napolitano to write a letter in support of this proposal. We were the one proposal from the state of California that was affiliated with the university. So they got behind it fully, both with their Washington office as well as locally. The Baskin School of Engineering, UC Santa Cruz. These are all very innovative drone companies. We got Embari on board as a partner as well. And these are all folks who have expressed support for our program through letters and advocacy. Again, that's Janet's office. We have the University of California Ag and Natural Resource Division, their main UAS safety office in Merced, SURPASS, which is Naval Postgraduate School, Defense Language Institute, and all these others. So the Western Growers, of course, Dennis supplied a good letter for us as well. So we're hopeful that we are going to receive this designation. That said, even in the event that we are not selected, the FAA had a main message for us, which was we're open for business. So we see this initial bringing together of folks that even if we're not on the front line of this program, we think this is an opportunity that demonstrates the demand for this type of facility in the region, and would like to continue working with all of those folks listed here and our local partners to advance this idea very much as an active program. So I'm happy to take questions on all of that when I'm done talking here. I know I'm getting the eye from Ralph, so I'm going to wrap it up soon. Just showing you the upcoming events that are very relevant to all of that. That's including our CalEd conference, but also all the ag tech stuff. This is, Dennis Donahue was really thrilled to hear about this through the Western Growers Innovation Center. And I just think there's an exciting future here that could really help bring some great opportunities to our area. And indeed, I can say through this engagement already has catalyzed real-time interest in development opportunity out towards the Marina Airport. So looking towards the future of new transportation, maybe we won't be talking about roads as much, but happy to take questions or comments you might have.
Michael, you have something?
Yes, Chair, members of the board, many of you may recall that last year during the budget process, the board decided to fund 2 more years of this economic development work. The coming year, as that winds down, Josh will be working very closely with all the jurisdictions, again, to figure out how that work that we've done over the last several years that is advanced economic development is supported and transferred onto the jurisdictions. During this last the 5 years that we've had this in place, we've been able to grow several different, I call them initiatives. I think Josh calls them initiatives. One he mentioned today is just one of several that's benefiting the individual jurisdictions. But during that time, the underlying jurisdictions have all beefed up their own economic development staff, and they have become very competent, and I think the board's decision was wise to figure out how to move this along. So just a couple of things. When you look at the Startup Challenge program, I noticed that in the last several years as we have participated, and I've been a judge a couple of times in the process, and I would tell you, there are representative businesses from every single jurisdiction in this region that are part of that program. And as a consequence of our collaboration with CSU Monterey Bay, we've grown that project to where it is getting a lot of regional and statewide and national attention. And again, I mentioned the second year of 2 years. Josh has also done a great deal of work in the Salinas Valley, working on ag tech and the tourism part that he mentioned today. Those things are taking off like wildfire, I think, wouldn't you say? And as a consequence of that, I think most of his work, we just have to give an applause to the great work that he's done so far, and I appreciate the extra time he's been spending, including working some 60 and 70-hour weeks to make it happen. So I just wanted to add that note, Josh.
Thank you.
Any
Working on
questions
my
for
own
Josh?
transition plan too, but
Any questions for Josh? Director Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Josh. I just wasn't real clear. It was the drone issue at the Marine Airport. Was that not just for our own jurisdiction's uses, seeing where there's further uses with drones, but also for I kind of read from what you said, a major research center for other uses of drones?
Well, what we proposed is a center of UAS drone innovation that would have a technical component and an economic development component. So it would leverage the existing structures that are in place for economic development, some of that local capacity I referred to earlier, and provide that as support for companies that are developing and testing new systems and advancing the business interests. And the thing is, by bringing those companies, that would be pretty wide open. We would look to use this to attract companies here to take advantage of UCM best facilities or Marina Cities airport business park plans, and thereby offer employment opportunities, kind of the high wage employment opportunities that we're looking to bring to the area would be, the target. So that's kind of the plan.
One more thing. Several years ago, before I was on this board, there was some scuttlebutt, and I think it was exactly that from some in the Bay Area through family members and other people I know of tech companies that want to stay close to home but break out a little bit, and we're looking down here. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I do. We do take conversations and provide information for various outreach from time to time. I will say that at the conference yesterday, the closing session, one of the keynote speakers was this guy who's the head of Google's drone research division, and in fact, they're actually doing work here already. We went up and talked to him after his speech. I said, "Yeah, I'm from Monterey Bay, from former Fort Ord," and he said, "Oh, we're doing stuff out there already." So they've been working with the city of Seaside and testing drone delivery systems at Surplus 2 for perhaps about last year or so. So they're aware of what we're doing here and the opportunities that exist. We're working to make them more aware and to refresh that awareness and expand on it, I think, is the opportunity that's here. So, obviously this has to filter through all of your local jurisdictions' approval and all of that, and that's why we're working closely with all the relevant parties. But I do think it's an exciting potential future. It's, in the time that I've been here, one of the first kind of real big kind of technical growth areas that seems possible.
Any other questions for Josh? Okay, thank you, Josh.
Great.
Thank you for your hard work. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the transition planning update. Ms. Damon.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board, members of the public. My name is Sherry Damon. I get to deliver your transition plan update. I will keep it brief, which I know I don't always do. So here you go. That's first slide. Where's my pointer? There we go. Check. Today we're going to just talk about what happened. We had a transition ad hoc committee meeting on March 5th. I'm not going to go over the entire program about what happened in that committee meeting, other than it was an engaged and lively discussion. We have some future dates, and I will apologize. I think there might be a typo on this slide because we were moving around. We were trying to schedule or get the calendars while we had everybody together. So next meeting for certain of the Transition Ad Hoc Committee will be March 27th at 2 o'clock. The April 13th date, I think, is an error, though. I think it's April 18th at 12:30. But as we get closer to that date, we'll confirm and reconfirm at the March Transition Ad Hoc Committee, and we routinely send out notices to the committee members and the members of the public as we get closer to those dates. These are ad hoc committees, so the dates are subject to change. They're not set in stone. Just a reminder, we are on schedule. I'm bringing you forward and keeping before the board the next 2 chapters, what we've been referring to as chapters in the transition plan, which ultimately will be put together as a part of the entire plan. I think at the Transition Ad Hoc Committee, I threw out 9 chapters, which would include a human resources component and an executive summary, miscellaneous contracts, and a conclusion, as well as the prior contract summaries that we had before us, along with the allocation, the assignments, the liabilities, the obligations, and how we anticipate the entire program to work, the plan to work together. So we're still on schedule, knock on wood. So let's talk about transportation. This is, these are, I remind everybody, these are draft summary charts of the contracts that affect transportation, what they outline in terms of liabilities, obligations. They might be reimbursement agreements for transportation. Most of these are reimbursement agreements, meaning that FORA has entered into agreements with, for example, the City of Marina to reimburse when the City of Marina builds the roads that are in the FORA Capital Improvement Program. They will come to FORA and say, okay, FORA, pay up, it's time to pay. We're in the environmental review process, we've completed it, we're now building. Some of these roads have not been started, some of them have been finished, but these are the kinds of contracts and obligations and liabilities that you will see compiled as part of the transition plan. How is FORA going to transfer those obligations and liabilities? What's the plan to finish them? It's noteworthy, transportation is one of those very unusual areas, and I'm going to show you a sample, the lead agency and assignments, the draft assignments. I think you may have seen, I know the Transition Task Force has seen a chart similar to this, and you've seen this chart in your capital improvement program, at least part of it. On the left-hand column, those are the lead agency's assignments as they are described in the capital improvement program. The estimated dates of completion are also in your capital improvement program. And what's distinctive here is there are 2 main obligations. There is the obligation to fund, as Director Morton has pointed out several times, that what's in our capital improvement program for the most part, if you look at like the first line, Davis Road, there's a number in there. That's FORA's share of that roadway improvement. The estimated date of completion indicates when FORA is likely to have the funding to be able to retire that obligation. But there's a different kind of obligation that's shown in this capital improvement program too, and it has to do with the 3 roads that are on the left-hand side, the FORA obligations, the roads that FORA said it was going to build because, for whatever reason, there was UXO, it was in ESCA property, they crossed jurisdictional lines, there was some issue where there was no clear lead agency or no lead agency stepped forward and said, we want to build this road. Those are the roads that the estimated date of completion dates are not funding dates. Those are dates that FORA hopes to complete the roadway projects by. I understand. So you can see East Side Parkway, bad name, it maybe get renamed. Not going to address that issue other than to say this is what our currently approved capital improvement program is. You can see we're looking out in the future, 2025, 2024, 2025. And that's when the financial projections as shown in the capital improvement program, lots of discussion about that, but that's what's in our capital improvement program today, indicate all those funds will have been received, and that roadway will be hopefully finished. So if FORA goes away and the roads aren't built, or we need to hand over the roads, you can see the proposed assignments right now for Inner Garrison, for example, is the county, and these are draft, subject to change and discussion. As part of the transition plan, though, we do have to identify who will be taking responsibility, successor agency responsibility for retiring these obligations. Seaside has some. Delray Oaks, you're the lucky recipient of one of those roads, actually 2 of those roads. So the more FORA does and completes the projects, the less those agencies, those successor agencies, will have to do. Habitat, let's talk about habitat. We know we're working on a habitat conservation plan. We've been working on that for a long time, in fact, almost a generation, I think. We're getting close to releasing the draft. As part of that, it's contemplated that there will be a joint powers agency or a habitat cooperative to implement the habitat cooperative. However, that habitat cooperative, the JPA, is not in legal existence. It is very likely not to be in legal existence. So to the extent you have an agency not in legal existence at the time the transition plan is ultimately adopted, the JPA cannot be designated as a successor agency. So that's an issue to think about. And I know at the TAC there was some wrestling with, hey, can't we just do the JPA? We know we want it for habitat. Let's get that part out of the way. That's very much a possibility, and I think we're working on that. But it's just an issue that I'm bringing up to the board, that unless an entity is in legal existence, you can't designate it as a successor. You can say all the entities receiving property have obligations, and if they collectively, some or all of them, form a JPA, those individual entities will be substituted with the JPA that's in legal existence, and that JPA can be named as a successor for purposes of the listed obligation. And those entities that choose not to sign on to a JPA or participate in that particular JPA would be named separately as a successor entity. Because the HCP has not also been released, it's not public document yet, the main habitat obligation is in the habitat management plan that was originally approved by the Army in the 90s, and that attaches to all property recipients. It's in the deeds that you have to comply with those provisions. Financing those are a big issue. It's one of the biggest issues facing, I think, the transition process. Is currently we fund habitat obligations using our community facilities district. We set aside about 30% of our community facilities district fees to fund habitat. That number projected post 2020 is about $46.2 million. And it's my understanding, at least at this point, that the Fish and Wildlife Agency, both at the federal level and the state level, are requesting that we fund that full amount prior to the permit expiration. They are looking at 2028 when our capital improvement program ends as the target date for fully funding that obligation to protect the habitat on Fort Ord in perpetuity. And that is something that if I were representing a private developer and I went to go get my habitat conservation plan protection, my take permit, I would have to fund that up front. Because we're an agency and we're doing a base-wide and a regional program, we have a stay-ahead provision. So there's some complicated finances behind it. But if the FORA CFD goes away, what that means is all of the jurisdictions that participate in the cooperative and have these habitat obligations have to figure out how they're going to continue to finance and fund that $46 million. And finally, last month, I brought you an update on Senate Bill 50. Since last month, Forest staff and the executive officer has been able to meet with the State Lands Commission regarding its application and administrative regulations to implement SB 50. SB 50 is the law that says the federal government, you're required to go to the State Lands Commission to get a certificate of compliance that they got the first right of refusal to the property. And that's problematic. I also outlined that we have several hundred acres that we still have to be transferred. And it's not just the acres that are to be transferred to FORA or to local jurisdictions. It's also things like rights of entry, easements across federal property. Anything that has to be recorded as an interest in real property has to receive that certificate of compliance in order to be recorded at the recorder's office. We were fortunate. We were also able to meet with the Natural Resources Committee staff who promulgated and worked on SB 50, and we met with the legislative offices. We were asked to submit some legislation language, not just FORA, but also its statewide counterparts as to local reuse authorities in order to exempt the BRAC process from the legislation totally. And in addition, the State Lands Commission is looking at crafting its administrative regulations to specifically deal with the BRAC process. But it would require us to go to the State Lands Commission, submit an application, and receive a certificate of compliance. So there's a cost and an associated time issue with having to go to the State Lands Commission to comply with administrative regulations that if there were a legislative change, it would exempt the process. We wouldn't have that additional time and cost issue. And that concludes my report.
If I could, while we're on SB 50, board members, this is a significant potential issue for all of us at Fort Ord. We've mentioned this before. It's not just about property transfers. It's significant that Sherry's pointing out that this is about easements, this is about rights of way. For example, if Marina Coast Water District, for example, needed an easement across Army property because it was going to try to serve water between Marina and the peninsula, that easement would have to go through a process, and a State Lands Commission process that is not only costly, but it's time consuming. SB 50 would require that. So there is still property transfer issues. Certain landfill parcels have yet to transfer. Certain water purveyor properties have yet to be transferred. There's still all of the Army's conveyance of properties along the, from one transfer, the Fed-to-Fed transfers are not impacted unless somebody wants to record that transfer. So federal property transfers, either to third parties or to other entities, are barred from being recorded by the state, by the recorders, without penalty of law and fines, without getting the State Lands Commission write-off. What we weren't able to accomplish, and Sherry was pointing this out, is getting some language that would exempt the FORA jurisdictions and others that have existing agreements under the Base Reliability and Closure Act. That doesn't take care of the problem for MCWD, for example, that may need an easement across Ord community to get one place to another, as an example. So there's still some issues that we're working on in this one, but we did make some progress.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Damon? Good.
So, Sherry, thank you very much. And I know you went through this a little bit with us on the habitat management. And just to confirm that the habitat management plan requires FORA to raise $60 million. Is that correct?
It's not the habitat management plan, it's the habitat conservation plan, which
HCP.
The HCP. If I said habitat management plan, I apologize.
No,
I meant HCP.
Okay, so the HCP has to raise $60 million. Currently, we're contributing $6,600 per every residential permit. So if we have a complete build out, we're going to have 6,160 residential permits, which is 40.5 million. What's our current mechanism on how we're getting to this 60 million? Does somebody
buy lottery tickets?
So
yeah, I know. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
We're going to print money.
Yours.
Do you want to do it?
So the 60 million is going to be the amount The 30% is only the board's policy building towards the total amount.
Right.
So
But
what-
if we're resigning this, I'm trying to lay this out, and it coincides with why I pulled the priority matter, which is now 8G, I think, is that at the CRAC meeting, not CRAC, but the ad hoc committee, this TAC, it became evident that there's some issues here, and I'm trying to get it on a board calendar that we can start looking at this. So I'm trying to understand this completely because it's difficult right now. Many of us in our jurisdictions are trying to work with a replacement CFD, and the habitat management contribution cannot be included in a development fee because there's no nexus. So we're trying to figure out and strategize, how do we fund this? And I'm trying to figure out what is this liability and have a better understanding of the tools that need to be put into place going forward. And so that goes back to what our schedule for the year is. And then there was a discussion at the close of the TAC meeting that we might be able to do something different than this path that we've gone down so far as a board. And I don't know what those paths might be for us to consider as just as individual takes with each developer coming in and paying for their individual takes. Are we too far down a path to revert to that? So I thank you for raising these issues, and I'm just trying to figure out if we have 13.8 million and there's going to be 46.2 million, and the housing is only going to pay 40.5 million. There's this big gap.
So a couple of points I think that need some clarification. We raise CFD fees on more than just housing. So we collect those fees for retail, industrial, and office. So and hotel rooms. And in fact, the CFD fees on hotel rooms is the second highest. I oftentimes use the same kind of analogy that you're using with just the residential, because that is the bulk of our CFD fees come from residential. But hotel rooms are the next highest revenue generator. All of the fees that we collect go into the program, and in our CIP program, all of those fees are used for the calculation of how we collect that 46.2 million. And our capital improvement program does show us retiring that obligation in 2028. That's a different issue from absorption, what happens if the economy goes down, some other things. And then in addition, remember, our capital improvement program is a three-pronged stool. It is the CFD, it is the property tax revenues, and it is land sales revenues. And so to the extent you have extra land sales revenues or property tax revenues, those roll into the CIP, and they can be used to help retire obligations that we have in the overall FORA base-wide cost and mitigation measure program.
Okay. Any other questions for Sherry? All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is the Marina Successor Agency request for subordination of the right to statutory payments. And this is a second vote.
It's just a coincidence that I'm presenting on 2 second vote items tonight, so don't always expect that every meeting. But, just going to cover today an overview of what the subordination request has been from the Marina Successor Agency, look at the property tax resource, have a few clarifications, and then set up the second vote for the board's consideration. So back in January of this year, January 25th, FORA received a letter requesting that FORA subordinate its right to property tax revenue, and this is for the successor agency's debt service obligations under tax allocation refunding bonds. So these are bonds that are about to be issued by City Marina Redevelopment Agency, successor agency. In that letter, FORA was given 45 days to approve or disapprove the request for subordination. So that's why we are here Wednesday and here today as a second vote to meet that requirement of the 45 days to get back to City of Marina. So FORA's property tax resource, in our FY 17-18 budget, we have an expectation of receiving $2.3 million of property taxes, and that's to fund FORA's operations. That's roughly $1.3 million. On the FORA capital improvement program, so roughly $1 million into the capital improvement program, and components within the capital improvement program include the jurisdiction incurred caretaker costs, where FORA is reimbursed the jurisdictions for the cost of managing and maintaining the property on former FORA prior to development, and then also the prevailing wage program, and anything additional to those two programs funds the rest of the FORA CIP. Just a note here, in FORA's implementation agreement with City of Marina, this is prior to the sale of land on FORA. It requires Marina to establish a method that FORA will receive its statutory property tax payments for base-wide mitigations and measures and their costs. So a few clarifications here. So we did consider this as part of FORA's concerns or considerations for the subordination request. One of the concerns has been, did the successor agency provide assurance of whether its proposed bonds will interfere with FORA or its successor's ability to issue debt as needed to carry out responsibilities? So we did have recent correspondence as of Wednesday or Tuesday from Karen Tiedemann, who is the attorney representing the successor agency. The letter did state that FORA is only entitled to receive its property tax until it dissolves in 2020. Now, the FORA's Authority Council has found that FORA may assign its property taxes post-2020 to meet its base-wide mitigation measures and base-wide costs. So we don't have that reassurance given those two distinct viewpoints. Just to mention, in the Health and Safety Code, it does talk about FORA's property tax revenue, and upon dissolution of the authority, that means FORA, the amount allocated for property taxes would continue to pay FORA's debt, its principal and interest, and other amounts on our debt service. So that's in the state law, the Health and Safety Code. Another clarification, so what are the eligible expenses for the successor agency to use the bond proceeds that are funded by these tax increment or property taxes? So just to note that the second implementation agreement between Marina and the Dunes developer, it allows for reimbursement of horizontal improvements. So that means the infrastructure and related improvements for the project, but it does not include constructing buildings. So it could be anything within the horizontal infrastructure, whether it's removing old pipelines, replacing, upgrading, landscape, other types of infrastructure improvements. It also allows for Marina Coast Water District connection and capacity fees that exceed the pro forma estimate to be funded through this resource as well. Okay, so back to the board's direction. So the recommendation today is to take a second vote on a motion to direct staff to issue a letter back to Marina rejecting the subordination request at this time and asking for more information, and for FORA staff to work with their staff and see if we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. And we're available for any questions.
Okay, any questions for Jonathan? Seeing none, any public comment? Okay, bring it back for a motion. Oh.
From my office. Thank you. Doug Yount, Marina Community Partners, Shea Homes. I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to address the board today on this matter. I'd just like to bring your attention to the letter that City Attorney or Redevelopment Counsel Karen Tiedemann provided to the City of Marina in your packets. I think there's some language in there that's very clear and very important, and I request that you look at it very carefully. And let me just read on the second page, first paragraph. The use of the Dunes pledged property tax increment. This is the increment, this is the portion of the property tax that would be used to issue bonds for the payment of the debt service on the bonds will not change any allocation to the property tax fund that is collected countywide to the taxing entities or FORA, and in fact will continue status quo, with the only difference being that a portion of what was previously being paid to MCP will be now used to pay debt service on the bonds. There is no impact to FORA. The previous slide that was up there, I would respectfully say is incorrect, that there was no evidence that in fact the FORA's, these funds go currently to Marina Community Partners as part of the larger development deal agreed back in 2008. And these additional funds now are just monetized into a bond. They come after all pass-throughs, all taxes are shared, and then goes back to Marina Community Partners. And then as opposed to getting annual payments, we get monetized bond payments. There's no impact at all to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. Finally, I'd like to also mention that on the last page of that letter, it says that the successor agency in requesting subordination provided for with substantial evidence, as they're required to do. And actually up above the third paragraph under subordination request says, Section 34177.5A4, the Health and Safety Code, also provides that a taxing agency, such as FORA, can disapprove the subordination only if its funds, based on substantial evidence that the successor agency will not be able to pay the debt service payments and the pass-through payments. Clearly that evidence has been shown by multiples that FORA, in fact, that those debt service can be paid and there's no impact to FORA. So I would caution any action relative to denial of the subordinate or disapproval of the subordination, because I think it's very clear in the state, one, that there is no impact to FORA, and two, there is a obligation of FORA as a taxing entity to provide substantial evidence to the contrary, which I don't believe can be provided. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? All right, bring it back.
Can I comment?
Let's have the motion, then we can have the comment on the second.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion, and that is that we take a second vote and direct staff to transmit a response letter requesting more information, denying the request to subordinate FORA's right to statutory payments.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion is second. On to the second.
So I would like to comment on this. The last Wednesday, everybody here gave some great consideration and were concerned about protecting FORA's interest. And I was asked by Ms. Garfield from Pacific Grove to get some additional information and facts to share, which I have. So we collect the City of Marina from our total redevelopment property tax trust fund. We collect $5,179,174. And from that, the pass-through to FORA is $700,000. And what's left available revenue after all the pass-throughs to the county to everybody else is that there is $2,696,000 available. The bond payment is $1,137,000. That's the maximum bond payment, which means there's an excess in this account each year of $1.5 million. That's available if the economy changes, that there's a drop, that there is sufficient funds in this account. And this account, how we factor this and sending this to you, trying to give you assurances FORA would not be harmed, was we looked at this as if the total taxes generated over the life of these bonds never went up. In other words, there was no further development, increased generation of funds. So I am trying to give you those facts to make you clear that we're talking about redirecting for the bond payment $1.137 million, and it's plenty of leftover money, $1.5 million a year, to make sure that FORA gets its $700,000. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Elam?
Yeah, very quickly. I was the one that made the motion to deny the subordination request. For the legal record, in rejecting the subordination request, I relied on a statement of uncertain future development, the outstanding obligations in FORA CIP funded by property tax, and that FORA or its successor's ability to use those property taxes to fund base-wide mitigation measures and costs post-2020 would be put in risk or jeopardy, for the record.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'll take a roll call vote, please.
Director Parker? No. Director Phillips?
Yes.
Director Adams?
No.
Director Edelin?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Morton?
No.
Director Hoffa?
Yes.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Alexander?
Yes.
Director Carbone? Director Gunter?
Yes.
Director Camp?
Yes.
Director Reimers?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 8F, 2018 anticipated FORA board work program. Mr. Hulamar.
Yes, Chair. The Port Order Reuse Authority staff took a look at what was going to be happening during calendar year 2017 and recognized that there was going to be such a significant work program that the board would be best served by having a work program that saw what would be coming. That was received well last year, and our Executive Assistant Deputy Clerk Dominique Jones took it upon herself to go through and consult with all the staff members to look at what might be coming during this year, which is at least as equal an amount of work program activities the board will have to engage. And so what you have before you is our best guess at the staff level, and then presenting to the executive committee what we thought you would be looking at for the coming year in terms of board work program and what you'd be receiving. So that's in sum what you've seen. If you have some specific questions, any of us at staff can address those.
Okay, any questions for staff?
I did have a question, if I may,
Yeah.
just on the specifics, and then I had a question is how we impact this going forward. But just on the graph page, item 1, 2, 3, number 4, from the bottom of the full page, and under CIP we have board approval to conduct munitions removal on South Boundary Road, and that just startled me that I have munitions coming out of CIP as opposed to out of ESCA. And what is this? I thought we already approved South Boundary Road, so can somebody just explain that?
Stan will correct me, but it's what we have to perform here is to complete a construction support plan. Even though the United States Army has completed the removals in that area of the base some time ago, transferred property to Delray Oaks and others, there was almost literally no way, unless you removed the road, to investigate the area beneath the road. And so we're required, when that roadway is improved, to put together a construction support plan that describes how we will move ahead with making those improvements to that area. Stan, do you want to?
So ESCA does not pay. It's really quite, I'm trying to find out if it comes from the ESCA budget versus the CIP budget.
The property does not come from the ESCA budget. There are land use controls on the property that exist. Those land use controls are UXO awareness training for the workers, construction support by qualified UXO technicians to make sure that the workers that are there on site are protected, and some other things. But those first two land use controls are what this would be funding.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, the reason I pulled this was that the prioritization and how things get on to this working calendar. I understand staff prepared this. Does this go to the executive committee? Did this go to, and they approved it? And then the question that I have going back to the earlier discussion that I used with the transition task force was habitat, that we just have the habitat item colored in 2018, but I think that's a really big priority, and it's a priority because we're all trying to prepare what we need to do in our jurisdictions, and I'm trying to move it up in priority here on this task of the year.
I think, you know, input from the board on how any of these agenda items occur, it's always up to the board, the executive committee, and we sort of absorb those and move it as best we can. Habitat conservation has been our top priority in terms of our overall program for years. We work with others to try to move that. Many times we've had board members assist us in moving this through the process, and it's critical that the board members get engaged in this. And we'd be happy to bring a more updated. Jonathan, can we get a status report on HCP as a instead of an information item on the consent agenda? We could, if the executive committee, if the board wants that, we can pump that up anytime.
So is it incumbent upon a board member to go to the executive committee and say, here's an issue raised at the transition task force that I would like to see on this work product that it comes forward? I just want to know the process of how we do that, because as we're sitting in the transition task force, we're seeing certain things that need more attention more immediately, or that we might be able to tend to quicker, and that it's not one of those things we have to transition after 2020. So I'm just trying to figure out the procedure.
Right.
And thank you for letting me pull this item for this purpose.
Sure. I think that we could use a referral process, like a little bit like what we do in the cities.
Yeah.
You know, submit a referral to the executive committee for, you know, a future agenda item. I see no problem with that.
Yeah, I just would like to know what it is so that as these issues just wave their flags in front of us.
But just, you know, I bring them up right here, just like you have.
So
and then we can consider that at the executive committee as a full-fledged agenda item.
Okay. So this was an information item just to receive this report. Well, I'll move that we receive this report. Thank you for allowing me. And then to direct staff that we have some type of referral process for us to move matters forward in the future as work order. Somebody wants? Second. Thank you very much.
Okay, the motion and the second. Director Hopper.
And I just wanted again to reiterate that I think a point that was made earlier, and I think indirectly Director Morton is getting to, is that we need to get on the work plan, an HCP JPA, because all of the jurisdictions need to have the certainty of knowing that that is going to be taken care of before. We can't even include it in our transition plan until we get it done.
Okay, very good. Okay, any more comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, let's move on to the public comment period. There doesn't appear to be any public comment. Items from members. Anything from the members? Yes, Director Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Rubio. So since I sit on the board of directors of both Marina Coast and Monterey One Water, and since today's items were sometimes long slog and not always good news for everyone from their particular perspective, I thought I'd just give you some good news. As you may have read in the newspaper, we had our groundbreaking for the conveyance pipeline, which will bring both Ruop water to the Ord community and also Pure Water Monterey water to ultimately Cal-Am's use. I'm told that Mountain Cascade is moving extraordinarily rapidly, almost 500 feet a day. They've moved across much of the Armstrong Ranch at this point and are moving down Crescent in Marina at the moment. The injection wells that Monterey One Water have built are pretty much close to completion. The connections for the additional water sources to fund all of this with water are pretty close to completion, and I'm told they're making great progress on the actual treatment plant itself out north of here, although I haven't gone out to see the big holes in the ground yet, but I've seen some photos, and so progress is moving forward. And I'd say the only small fly in the ointment I can think of is that we still haven't quite inked the easement through CSUMB for the conveyance pipeline. So if anyone knows anyone at CSUMB, please feel free to encourage them to move forward.
It's my understanding they're making quite a bit of progress on that as well, Tom.
Our general manager has expressed that. I want to see it come before my board for signature. Thank you.
So just one last, while MCWD is here to speak, the FORA board is the only venue where Fort Ord ratepayers have an ability to be represented with regard to Marina Coast Water District. And they have sent out notices of a rate increase, and there's a time period within which Fort Ord community or Marina or anybody else can file objections, and there's a public hearing. And so I would like Marina Coast Water District representative to give that deadline, timeline, and when the meeting is. Thank you.
So I believe the last potential opportunity, unless the board postpones that decision, will be this Monday night at City Council chambers. Thank you very much, City of Marina, for loaning us those chambers for our meetings. This is the Prop 218 process. The public can submit protests, as they're called. They're called protests, but they're a sort of vote up until 7 p.m. on Monday. They will be accepted up until that point in time. Our staff, of course, will have to count them that night, so they'll be a little busy at one point. This has been in the works. There's been, I believe, 2 public hearings. I don't recall the dates, but going back into the January timeframe. And of course, what is proposed in terms of rate increases for both Central Marina and the Ord community are based predominantly on a rate study that Curcio engineers did for Marina Coast Water District. We had to make some tough decisions in that in terms of trade-offs between increasing current rates to pay into things like capital improvement funds versus getting debt at some point when we need to do that. And of course, the minute you start taking on debt, you end up paying some bank interest costs. So the board did its best in working with the cost engineering firm Curcio to try and come up with something that doesn't hurt our current ratepayers too much, pays all the bills, and doesn't burden future generations too much. So I'm sure there'll be some folks who will say they disagree, but it's the democratic process.
Any other items from members? Seeing none, we're adjourned.